Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to focus on a topic that is both strategic and timely for virtually every subscription business, which is the payments experience. Hi, my name is Steve Arnsoff, and I am the Senior Vice President of Marketing at FlexPay. And our panel today, our session is going to be an awesome one. We are very fortunate to be joined by two payments industry veterans who collectively have over 50 years of experience and a deep understanding of the payment system and how it can be optimized as a strategic asset for subscription businesses, and will provide very direct guidance today on how to manage some of the shortcomings in the system that do impact the payments experience in ways that I think most people are probably not aware of. So first, let me introduce Darryl Hicks. Darryl is the CEO of FlexPay. Darryl is a serial entrepreneur and technology expert with more than 20 years of payments experience and is a pioneer in card not present sales. In fact, Darryl founded FlexPay out of necessity due to the hard-earned lessons that were gained around the critical need to solve credit card processing issues because of the impact it was having on his businesses. Our second speaker is Melanie Stout. Melanie is the head of recurring services at Optimized Payments, and before that was a partner at Paul Larson Consultant. Melanie has worked with hundreds of merchants across multiple verticals, helping businesses deploy high-functioning payment systems and delivering optimal payment success. Okay, in today's session, we're going to focus on really the meat around building best-in-class payments experiences and really work to develop the understanding about why it's so important to strategically align systems and experiences for customers that connect payments and help retention. This is a very rich topic for us to cover today, so please, if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A box, and we'll have an opportunity at the end for Melanie and Darryl to provide feedback to those questions. All right, let's get started. So we all know subscription companies must be customer obsessed. Subscription customers have a special relationship that they've entrusted businesses with. They've committed to an ongoing relationship where they're paying for regular delivery of products or services. Of course, this represents a much deeper level of trust and value than an infrequent single purchase transactional relationship that most businesses have with their customers. So within that, of course, is the payments experience. And why is this so important for a subscription business? Why is it more important than perhaps other kinds of businesses? When you think about a subscription relationship, there's really only three areas of interaction that a customer has with the brand. There, of course, is the product experience when they use it or experience the service. There is the customer support experience when it's needed. And there's the payments experience when they're making payments for the product or service. And of course, the impact that a poor experience can have on customer satisfaction is high. And it, in fact, is a high contributor to customer churn. And in fact, in today's environment where we know that the new economic challenges that many subscription businesses are facing have created new challenges for customer acquisition and even voluntary churn or retention. So today's topic is incredibly timely and relevant. So let's get started. So Melanie and Darryl, how would you define a great payments experience? And conversely, what is the poor payments experience for a customer?
A great payments experience is one where you capture the money, right? So that's critical. That's what you want to do at the end of the day. But there are multiple components of the payments experience for a subscription company. There's obviously the acquisition. So that payments experience, you ideally want to eliminate friction. You want to offer the payment methods, the currencies, what the price point, whatever your customer needs in order to convert. You need to be sure you can deliver those items in your checkout experience. But then from a subscription standpoint, renewals are critical. The lifetime value of your customer is obviously dependent upon your ability to continue to bill your customer. Making sure that you get those payments through will ensure lifetime value, and it will also help keep your customers happy for the long haul when they want your product and services to not have a disruption. Even to be contacted, we're having a hard time with it. Can you update your info? Those are breakage points. People don't always read their email. They might not get around to it. So operationalizing the success of your payments is really key to keep those customers humming along. And a bad payments experience is the opposite of all those things, right? So breakage, having the card fail, charging them the wrong time, any kind of other process error that might happen throughout the whole life cycle of your subscriber will be one that will deter them from continuing along with you. And at the point of acquisition, if you don't have the right payment methods, or if there's a delay, if they consider your checkout to be risky, there's something about it that looks like it might not be secure, or anything along those lines, you risk losing that customer.
Yeah, I love all of that. And, for me, when I think about, a great payments experience, well, it's easy to say, well, I mean, it just works, right? It's kind of transparent. It just works. But beyond that, I like to focus on the impact, right? Like a great payments experience protects the relationship that you have with your customers. And I love how, Steve, you touched on, subscription is a special kind of relationship with your customers. It's different from a one-time, more transactional sort of purchase. Once you realize that subscription is a special kind of relationship with your customers, then you can learn that it requires a specialized approach, or else that relationship is going to fail. If we focus on payments authorization management, we're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but we kind of joke internally that, what we're really focused on here is relationship failure management. We help you fail less at relationships. And I think that when the payment stack is not working properly, you're introducing all kinds of pain, friction, opportunities for churn, frustration, even when people are super satisfied with those other two legs of the three-leg stool that you talked about, right? They can be super satisfied with the product and service. They could be getting great customer care, but when the payments experience is constantly annoying them, it really weakens their relationship and starts to cause some real damage.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So we've talked a little bit about the payments experience, but let's dig into why it's so important. Why is it critical for subscription businesses to really optimize the experience, and what is the connection between that experience, satisfaction, loyalty, and ultimately the health of subscription businesses? Darryl, you want to start with that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I learned when I was a merchant running a large amount of subscription payments, and we sold to or serviced tens of millions of customers across 4 continents, and we realized at one point there's a structural problem in the payment stack. There's a really big chunk of failed payments that are not your customer's fault. And once you know that, you start to treat everything differently, right? You're not going to just automatically default to putting it on your customer to fix something that might not be in their fault in the first place. And we did a really great market research together here at FlexPay, where we went out and spoke with a very large swath of the American population and realized that when customers are exposed to payment issues, they're now forced to make a decision on whether they actually want to keep this service. The crazy thing that we found out when we did that market research study was that up to 48% of all churn comes from payment issues. And you have to ask yourself, why so much? Why is this the single largest driver of churn as far as like one bucket or category? And I think the reason behind that is that there's something going on even in the psyche of like human beings and the way that we operate, evolutionally, like over many, many thousands of years. We want to be valued by our tribe. We want to be accepted. We want to feel that we're worthy. And when a payment fails and you now notify your customer of it, it's almost like you're saying to them, you're unworthy, you're uncredit worthy. Everyone's had that experience of like, I remember like, one of the first times I was using my debit card and I was 16 to go buy a hot dog with my friends and it didn't go through. The embarrassment that I felt, like, oh my goodness, like, is this on me? But now just imagine, I logged into my bank and I realized that there was lots of money in the bank. There was something wrong with that terminal. How do you think I felt about that hot dog stand after that? I was livid, way more angry and upset than it even rationally makes sense for me to be. So here's the thing, a payment fails, you've automatically just now created an opportunity for, churn in your business. And now you're not only forcing your customer to make a decision on whether they want to keep your service when you notify them about it, but you're doing that when they're in a negative emotional space. So one of the things that we discovered in the market research is that people that were kind of on the fence just they were satisfied with the product, but they were somewhat satisfied with the service. Churn was super high with them. That this negative emotional experience of being notified of a failed payment and asking the customer to do something about it was enough to drive a significant amount of churn in the business. So that's really why it drives churn so much. And so again, when you come back and understand, whoa, a significant portion of these failed payments actually aren't even my customer's fault. There's a structural problem in the Visa, MasterCard, American Express ecosystem. Maybe once we understand that, we can look for tools that can help to mitigate some of that before we just by default go and put it on our customer.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's such a personal experience, and it's insulting and upsetting and embarrassing. You know, all of those emotions you might feel when your payment method is unsuccessful. I remember working in retail when I was in high school and swiping a card and it would decline, and it was uncomfortable for me to tell the customer, sorry, you can't buy this today, and, you know, having to go put it back in front of their faces, and they would be appalled, and I guarantee they never came back into the store because they were embarrassed. But the challenge that e-commerce merchants have now is that products are available so many other places. So if your payments tech stack isn't working and there's something operationally that's wrong, then they can very easily just open another browser window and go buy it somewhere else. If their subscription fails, it gives them an opportunity to really evaluate all of their expenses. Do I care that this failed? Do I care enough to go do something, to go get my other credit card out of my wallet, come back, click the email, fill in the information? What if I don't want to use that card online because that's my debit card, I only have one credit card? There's a lot of activity required in going forward and having your customer come repair their subscription, particularly if, you know, now as we're entering a recession and they may choose to just save some money, right? So that's kind of what we call active passive churn, where they get the email saying we've had trouble processing your payment. They say, okay, well, that's good. Now I don't have to worry about canceling it, and I'll be okay without it. If your service is one that they really love or need, so a SaaS business or cell phone, you know, a utility where they absolutely have to get it taken care of or else they'll lose that service, then you're just giving them a job to do, a task to do, to add to their list. And it's a challenge, it's difficult. You know, Verizon might text me a bunch of things and they're annoying me, so I'll say, forget Verizon, I'm just gonna switch to T-Mobile, it's easier, it's cheaper, whatever. You know, there are so much competition, so many competitors out there for merchants now that if you're adding any element of friction or insulting them, you're really gonna lose that customer. We actually had a recent instance with a couple of our clients who have noticed a very bizarre decline just started. And a different processor, so we had processors doing some research on it. It turns out Visa was doing a stand-in authorization. So the cardholders, and it was a bank in the Netherlands, were calling their bank, and the bank is saying, we approved it. So the bank and the merchant can't come together to figure out what's happening. The consumer is mad at the merchant. They're not mad at the bank. They're mad at the merchant, and they're going to go somewhere else. But it's Visa who's doing it, right? And it's taken 2 months to get to the bottom of this sort of thing. But those types of situations happen all the time in the ecosystem, and so many times they just get overlooked.
That's
and there's
great.
something I wanted to jump in with on that too. It was interesting. You talked about cell phone carriers. We had a conversation actually with one of the largest carriers in America who rolled out a new suite of optimization tools in their payment stack, and they saw a 70% reduction in inbound customer service calls related to payment issues, as well as a pretty meaningful uptick in net promoter score. So you think that, well, yeah, if I fix these problems in the payment stack, my lifetime value is going to go up. I'm going to make more money in my business, and all that's very, very true. But there's all these softer sort of nuanced things that start to come out of having a properly optimized stack as well. Even if you know, like a cell phone carrier, their cure rate on failed payments is crazy high, in the high 90s percentage-wise, but they even still get significant benefit from optimizing the payment stack and reducing customer service care costs, as well as improving the reputation of their brand in the marketplace, as measured by things like NPS.
Great, thank you. I'm curious, for the two of you, you've talked a lot about the consumer experience for B2C businesses. Do B2B subscription businesses also feel the pain of payment issues?
For sure. Yeah, it's a credit card at the end of the transaction. So the same types of failures happen. I've worked with a number of B2B merchants who have a large percentage of their portfolio on corporate cards. So as employees churn, the card goes away and there's no account update component. You can't get a new card from Account Updater because the employee is gone and that account is totally dead. So it's a unique churn in those types of scenarios. They have to capture it differently than just traditional payment recovery. But they do still have the same sort of traditional payment failures. And in some cases, to a greater degree, because they'll have virtual cards coming in. A lot of HR departments are using virtual cards now. They'll also be having a higher price point for the most part. They may have different billing frequencies. So if it's a usage-based model and people need to do a top-up on service or something along those lines, the price point could vary, and that could impact what can be approved, what cannot be approved.
Yeah, and I can tell you some of our largest customers at FlexPay sell B2B services on credit card, annual recurring products in the $300 to $400 price point, and their failure rate on fresh attempts on annual recurring subscriptions is just north of 20%. Staggering. Like this, even higher in some cases than what you see on B2C. So yeah, to Melanie's point, everybody struggles with this.
Great, thank you. So, Melanie, Darryl introduced the concept of the payments tech stack. I would love to have you dig into a little bit more on what makes up a typical payments tech stack and why it's so important for companies to manage that tech stack to help improve the payments experience and the payments results.
Sure. The tech stack starts off with the point of capturing the customer. So it could be a shopping cart or just a simple checkout page. And what you need there is really varied based on your product, your service. If you are doing consumer packaged goods and you have a lot of single sale as well as subscribe and save or a combination of both, you'll probably want a robust shopping cart that can recommend additional products and have all of the customer reviews and detailed product information. And then the next step, if you are converting them to subscriptions, would be a billing management system, whether you outsource it or build it in-house, and then a processor. A lot of merchants think they also need the concept of a gateway. You don't necessarily need one of those. A processor could be just a direct connection. A billing system can act as the gateway to the processor. But with all of these components, what's really critical is understanding how each of them integrate with each other, because not all integrations are created equal. Not all processors excel at recurring. There are some whose DNA has been built on it, and that's really their core competency, and they would handle the recurring business for most of the world's subscription companies. But if you're a billing system, whether you're building it in-house or outsourcing it, making sure that whomever you choose for one piece ties optimally to the next piece is going to be critical. So there might be services like Account Updater that would be utilized differently based on how they're connected, which service they're on, if they went to the latest version or they didn't go to the latest version yet. And then on the e-commerce side, that's usually the trickiest part. So if you're going toward a certain kind of startup shopping cart, they'll try to keep you into a limited loop of vendors where they're white labeling the whole thing through. So you don't have control over really any of your payments. But then there are others that are very tightly integrated with a recurring system or enable you to completely build your own in-house billing system off of your cart. And then for companies who don't really need a robust cart, who just need a lovely checkout experience, that's usually pretty easy to build in-house. You can have the PII tokenized. You don't have to worry about capturing that on your own, right? You can have that piece of it hosted by iFrames by someone else, but then you can control the brand and the look and the price points and everything else as you wish. So The key, though, really is understanding how each component works together. We've been asked to come into a lot of RFPs when they've already picked one piece and then they want to look at another one, but the one they picked won't work with any of the others that they want to look at. So you have to, back it all up and start from scratch and say, if you want this one, or if your priority is here, if your cost reduction focus is here, then these are the vendors we need to look at for the rest of the piece through.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, I love that point you made, Melanie, about the holistic approach. And sometimes, merchants just lack that expertise to understand in context how all these pieces are going to work together. But I'm a big fan of that Peter Drucker quote, what gets measured gets managed. And I think that that's the biggest thing that so few companies are tracking as much as they should be. I mean, we run into so many merchants that don't even track voluntary versus involuntary or passive churn separately. They just have a churn number. That's just one simple thing that can help you to see where you have an opportunity for optimization. But then within each of the types of churn buckets, we really need to start creating dispositions, right? And then track their movement over time as you layer in optimizations. So how do you know where you should start? Like which piece of your payment stack needs to be optimized? You got to start measuring, right? And where are the pain points that you actually have? Then you can start, only then can you start to have a conversation about what pieces you're going to need to tweak. And this isn't rocket science, right? But once you understand the impact of a piece that may not be working properly, then you can start to understand how important it is to manage and where to apply your efforts. And then also within the scope of, holistically, how do all these different pieces going to work together, and where do I need to make maybe compromises? As far as the two areas that we really see need to be sort of optimized, so much of the payment stack are just static pieces that need to get attached together. The two big areas for optimization are like the fraud tool that you're using to make sure that you're filtering for bad actors on your side. And then obviously your payments authorization management, right? Or PAM for short. Payment authorizations management is a really important category that's starting to come out with some great tools in it. That's the category that FlexPay sits in as well, of being able to figure out that once you have a tool that says, okay, yes, this is a customer that I want to interact with, let's make sure that the auth that we're getting as high a rate of auth as possible without creating that artificial moment of truth in the relationship with the customer.
That's great. And Darryl, how should companies think about what they want to build internally versus what they want to work with outside experts on, specialized solutions? Do subscription companies have to look at this as what is core to their business versus what is specialized expertise that should be outsourced?
Yeah, so generally speaking, we find that, so let me back up just for 1 second and say, percentages don't pay bills, right? Dollars and cents do. If you only have $50,000 a month in failed payments per month, maybe a good enough dunning solution is going to be okay for your business. But if you have over $1 million a month in failed payments, or like some of our customers, over $15-20 million a month in failed payments, well, every fraction of a percent in improvement on optimizing the payment stack pays massive dividends. And so what we see is several companies with over $2 billion in revenue, they start to build out large in-house teams to optimize payments because of the ROI that they get from it, right? Or however, even those larger enterprises still use third-party tools as tools in their toolbox for solving the problem. For companies under $2 billion in revenue, it's probably best to focus your internal resources on measuring. From there, you're going to pick up some low-hanging opportunities for managing, and then outsource the middleware tech to someone who's laser focused on fixing just that one problem, because you're not going to have enough resources to go deep enough into really optimizing around it. And the stakes now are so high because, like I was saying, every fraction of a percent in improvement on getting your auth rates up is protecting your relationship with your customers and protecting your brand, but also generating significantly more revenue for you, which is so much more important, especially what we see happening right now in a downturn in the economy. I mean, it's always been true that acquisition is the first inning of the game. Retention wins the game. in subscription. But I think never is that more true than when you're entering into a recession or an economic downturn. So, and that's, that's why the more time and energy we started pouring into optimizing the payment stack, the more expensive it was getting for us. And that's why I said, at some point this is going to become untenable. We've really got no choice but to turn this into a standalone tech stack and start offering it to more people so that we can justify the amount of time, effort, money, resources. I mean, we've got over 8 billion transactions in a proprietary database that we're running machine learning on, and a whole team of dedicated data scientists and coders and building relationships with issuers. Like, the average merchant's just not going to be able to go and do all of that. So I think there definitely are opportunities to build when it comes to the measuring, understanding your pay points, low-hanging fruit for sure. There's some great things that you can do to manage it, but really important to find those third parties that can come in as middleware sitting inside of the payment stack to kind of steer transactions appropriately and clean up the data so that you end up getting the higher approval rates.
Yeah, I agree. And you have to look at your internal expertise, your resources, and where you want to focus your time and energy. Every April and October come the dreaded updates. Usually it's a cost increase, but there are also other changes that come out. Decline reasons might change and rules around recovery might change. Often there's not a lot of advance notice. So if you're a company where your resources, you have 100% of your payments in-house, and that same team is working on marketing efforts, you'll have to stop that. You can't ignore the payments updates or everything could break. So you have to pivot, make sure you prioritize all of those projects into your IT queue and your roadmap, and always kind of plan on, all right, well, every September, October, and into November, we're going to have this project queue where we have to just keep it open. We don't know what's going to happen. Maybe it'll be nothing, and then we can put the resources back on marketing and revenue generating efforts. Maybe not. Maybe the project will be longer than we expected. So if you have those resources, that's one thing. But when there's the ability now, 15 years ago, this type of vertical of a vendor didn't exist, right? There wasn't payments optimization vendors that were solely focused on inserting themselves into the flow. So now that it's an option, it's definitely a value add to not have to focus all of your internal resources on those types of quick pivots and adjustments.
Mm-hmm. Wow, every time we have these sessions, I feel like we could talk for 2 hours, and unfortunately we just don't have that amount of time. Such a valuable, rich conversation today. For all of our attendees, we have a number of questions in the queue, and Darryl and Melanie are going to stay on and answer them. So we really encourage you to do so. Before we get into them, though, if you have to leave, I do want to mention that both Darryl and Melanie will be at the subscription show in New York in November. It's a wonderful show, and they'll both have speaking roles, so a good chance. Melanie will be speaking in multiple sessions, and in fact, we'll be moderating a Visa session. And Darryl will be presenting one of the keynotes at the show. So I encourage you both to come by and say hi and introduce yourselves. So let me start with questions. The first one is from David. And I think, Darryl, this is a great question for you. David asks, it's a two-part question. Do you see failures in general go up as economic trends decline, like we're experiencing now? And secondly, do you have any thoughts on what drives generic failure codes, such as please call the number on the back of your card, your bank requests, we do not have this card?
Perfect. So yes, we are absolutely seeing an increase in failed payments as a percentage of the bucket of transactions, right? So if you're submitting 100,000 transactions a month on your subscriptions, the percentage of those that are failing on first attempt is going up. Interestingly, it's not just in NSF. It's happening so much more in the do not honor category, which is directly related to the second part of David's question. So what the heck does do not honor even mean? Well, do not honor typically is the bank saying, we have fraud rules in place, and we have decided that this transaction is not, it maybe looks a little too sketchy for whatever reason, and we're not going to approve it. The funds are available on the card. There's nothing wrong with the account. The bank has decided, or actually more accurately, the issuing processor and its fraud tools have decided that this transaction should not be approved. Now, there are other reasons that leak into the do not honor bucket, but about 90% plus of everything in do not honor is you have bumped up against the fraud system at the issuing bank, and for whatever reason, they've decided they don't want this transaction to go through. Now, that doesn't mean it actually is fraudulent. This is part of the structural problem that I was alluding to earlier. There's just over $40 billion a year in fraud losses that are sitting in the payments ecosystem. Some of that gets eaten by issuing banks. Some of it gets pushed back onto merchants. There's over $460 billion a year in failed payments, false declines, right? False declines are the transactions that were declined, even though the card is legitimate, even though there's funds available, but the bank has decided that they need to be cautious. So if you look at the math on that, it's about an 11 or 12 to 1. Some merchants in some cases, some banks in some cases are as high as 13 to 1. Best in class for an issuing bank is probably going to be 6 to 1, but everyone kind of falls within that scope. And what's happening here is that the issuer says, well, we need to protect our P&L, we need to protect our customers, and we're just going to dial up our filters on what we're willing to approve in order to keep fraud out of the ecosystem, and perfectly legitimate transactions are getting thrown out all the time. This is part of what we do, working directly with the issuers to untangle what's actually going on specifically in the do not honor category. Some of this does leak into NSF as well, so insufficient funds reason codes, but do not honor is where I love to play, and where we love to have conversations with the issuers and the issuing processors on what we can do to optimize this. There are so many drivers that a merchant can control that will, over time, improve the ratio of do not honor that they're getting, probably outside of the scope of what I can get into in this conversation. But that's what it means. It's the vast majority of everything in do not honor is a fraud system at the issuer that's decided that they don't like this transaction for whatever reason.
Excellent, thank you. And Richard has asked a couple of questions. I think the two that we can get to are, Melanie, Richard asked, what should a retailer consider when using subscription payment services from Apple Pay and Google Pay in the respective app stores?
Well, initially what you want to consider is will it improve conversion, right? So the usage of those, Apple is picking up, Google hasn't really picked up too much. They are still primarily intended to be a point of sale contactless payment method rather than an online payment method. Traditionally, we haven't seen much success with retention on those pays. Apple Pay just announced that they are now going to be utilizing the concept of account updater because their wallet has always been tied to the device ID. So for tech-savvy iPhone users who are always getting the latest and greatest iPhone, that wallet would fail the next time you go to pay if they had a new device. So Apple is just now changing that. So we expect to see Apple Pay retention increase. You have to be able to sniff and be sure that you're only offering Apple Pay when someone's using Apple operating systems. You wouldn't want to offer it to someone on a Samsung and vice versa. But evaluate and test payment methods. Whenever you can test, that's always recommended. Put it in your cart. If you offer too many payment methods, it's shown to kind of give overload to the consumer and they bail. So make sure you're not giving them like a NASCAR logo of payment methods to select from, and just choose the 1 or 2 or 3 that will help increase conversion and still continue to provide success and retention.
Great, thank you. And I think we're about 5 minutes over now, so probably gonna need to cut off today. So if any questions we couldn't get to, I apologize, but we really appreciate everybody that joined us. Darryl and Melanie, thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. There's such good information that's shared, and thank you to everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.